And for those of you who are listening, there will be many people who will let you out, who want you to self-sabotage and say to you, "It's okay, Anon. It's okay that you failed. You're just human." No, no, no. My friend, if you are here on this chat right now, if you're here on this podcast right now, you're the kind of person that does not belong amidst the mediocrity of society. You're precisely the person cut from a different fabric of life who fate set aside golden threads for you. It is up to you to realize that potentiality. Anyone, both yourself, the bitch in the back of your head, or the bitch outside telling you sweet nothings outside to self-sabotage and become nothing, both these people are telling you lies. The truth is painful, always. And the painful truth is that you were meant for more. The reason why you're not achieving it is either because you're weak or because society is weak too. These are both valid reasons, and that you must fight to whatever end, however soon it may become, or however painful it may be, whatever ends it may take you, whether it's prison or hospital or whatever, death.
Prison hospital.
Follow it to whatever end. Make your soul into a bullet, and whatever happens on the other side of that pain that you penetrate, that's up to the gods, not up to you. Your choice, your decision, is to affirm that life with intensity all the way through. Everything else is a lie. Don't fall for lies. Don't fall for sweet nothings. Fight to whatever end. That's what I say.
Based. Hello, everyone. Today I am joined by General Lance from Lance's Legion, soon-to-be best-selling author of Caesar Bellator, and subject matter expert on some of my favorite philosophers, from Nietzsche to writers such as Mishima and Jünger. And it's finally good to get him on the show. I reached out to you, what was it, 6 months ago, back when it was right after your Uber Boyo interview, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I think we were mutuals a long time before that, when it had been on Instagram, but obviously Meta's become a lot more censorious recently than previous. But it is definitely very nice to finally be able to talk to you, sit down, and pick your brain, because I think one of the fortunate and unfortunate things about being part of the whatever zeitgeist is that a whole bunch of hangers-on come up, and they're full of lack of talent. You're one of the few posters on the internet that I actually do thoroughly enjoy, so it's very good. It's a very good feeling to be here, so thank you.
Hell yeah. So I guess right away, because I think one of the things when I was so obviously I was looking through Uber Boyo's stuff, and I saw your interview, and that's kind of how I sort of found your channel, and then I checked out the publishing company. I think right away the thing I really liked is, for me personally, I would say the most influential thinkers in terms of my philosophy have been Nietzsche, Jünger, Mishima, Evola, and that's 3 out of 4 of the guys that you're always talking about. So it's it was cool, because even within the sort of online right, you see such a vast array of different opinions, ranging from your Groypers to your neo-pagans to full-on Nat-Socias. Then you have your Nietzscheans, and even in that you have our specific Nietzsche, which is I don't even know what to call it, but it's Mishima, Jünger, Nietzscheans or whatever, right? So it's it's cool to find somebody with a very similar niche, and that's kind of been one of the things I've been trying to find is what is the right community, what is the right interpretation of right-wing philosophy. And from my studies, it's kind of what we've both stumbled upon, this sort of idea of the warrior, the heroic ideal. And there's a few other good people like that. There's the Arc. I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff. He goes by Heroic Ideal on X. Yeah, he's pretty good. There are people with this specific niche, and I think a lot of it is really rooted in the youth, because we come from a much younger generation compared to most of the online right, whether you go from Michael Millerman or even old guys, right? Yeah, very very anti-Nietzschean in a sense. We are the youth, the future is ours, right? So that's why I've really wanted to have you on, and kind of we can bounce ideas and all these guys that we really like. So I guess my first question for you is, how did you get into this specific niche? How do you get into writers like Nietzsche, Jünger, and Mishima?
Well, I guess it kind of starts like this. Hmm. I mean, you got to start all the way from the beginning. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I come from a military family, career, like officers, all the way from the Revolutionary War. Like, I can like trace in career, not just like, oh, like they served, no, like officers and so on. And that has a certain type of distinction, but also ethos that you kind of traditionally hold over from time and time and again. However, I noticed one thing, especially in the United States at a young age, that the closest thing to the warrior ethos you could get was to basically be like a libertarian, which is actually kind of the antithesis of it, really. Libertarians are draw their lineage from the Girondins, or like rather the sans-culottes of the French Revolution, which is basically petit bourgeois type individuals, which is usually the merchant class, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, America is founded as a merchant republic, but the greater start that I'm trying to say is that basically I saw the History Channel once, right? Okay, and I was brainwashed, okay, by seeing some really cool World War II documentaries, okay, and there was a certain faction that had really, really cool uniforms, and I was like, I love those dudes. Dudes sound awesome. And then I discovered the Japanese and so on, and basically that kind of like, set a flame in my heart, and I was like, no, 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 there are cool dudes out there. It's just that we live basically under the big grand ass of this, middle-aged school mom suburbia kind of like ethos. And I was like, no, 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 there has to be something greater out there. And so I read widely, and I basically discovered first like Machiavelli, which is
Mm-hmm.
actually one of the reprints that I did, which is The Prince.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that when I was like 10, and ever since then I've always had a copy of The Prince at hand, because and this might sound cringe to most, but I think it's important to always like lay your cards down. Honesty always wins out, and I think like I always saw myself as a prince, and if that makes sense, like a leader, to not just simply in the military matters, but concern oneself in political ones, and by default, of course, cultivate a certain culture around your city state and civitas and so on. And one thing led to another. Machiavelli leads to Sorel. It leads to X, Y, and Z until finally, I meet Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche, of course, is a seminal figure. He's one of those individuals that, he permeates and penetrates and mind fucks everything that comes into existence. Ever since like the 1900s, like early 1900s, everything, whether being oriented against him or with him, has been defined by him. And you read this a lot in Deleuze, and a lot of like leftist quote unquote Nietzscheans. They consider themselves Nietzscheans, was pretty funny. I mean, it's the biggest cell phone ever.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I guess I came across Mishima because I actually read Bronze Age Pervert, who who like highlighted this guy to me, and I was like, at that time I was serving, and I was like, this guy sounds like fucking awesome. He like sounds squared away. And so I like immediately took it upon myself to read first Patriotism, which was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And then of course I read everything else, and Runaway Horses, Spring Snow is my favorite
Hmm.
personally. The Decay of an Angel. Anyway, but he's very interesting because his story was more interesting. His actual, like, obviously he's like one of these writers that wrote great things. However, his life was actually more meaningful to me than anything that he ever wrote.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why, and for those of the audience that don't know, obviously, is that he wrote throughout his life, and then he discovered Sun and Steel, or whatever, and then basically gave himself to a warrior ethos, and then finally understood, especially after World War II, that Japan, for those of you that don't know, when we like conquered and unfortunately subdued this noble people,
Mm-hmm.
the Japanese, we made them disarm, and we cause their constitution to be peaceful and so on, and to become secular, which is actually something antithetical to the constitution of the ethnos of the Japanese people, because a lot of the Japanese people is derived from their emperor, which is a godlike entity. Actually, he is a god. He is a descendant of a god, and I refuse to believe any atheist shrill voice that says otherwise. He is a god. He's just not one of my gods. There exist many gods, and they exist among the reeds. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that he tried to rekindle this greater animus within the Japanese back to re-embracing a warrior and, Nippon like ethos that was completely different, that was becoming Americanized. And that's exactly what I want, except America hasn't had like because of the fact that we come from an anglophonic culture, we actually are a deeply mercantile one.
Mm-hmm.
And so our act of self-overcoming will be something that will have to be magnitudes greater than what he was trying to attempt. But back to the story, he basically went to a Japanese infantry military base. He was very famous amongst the military caste,
Mm-hmm.
and then basically took the general hostage and made an impassioned speech. And of course, the peons who made up the military were rude, and they didn't know what was being gifted to them. But alas, they didn't listen, and therefore he committed a holy act called seppuku. And basically, that's his story of trying to re-spiritualize the Japanese people, to re-embrace their emperor and who they are. And that's kind of something that really inspired me, because that's what my personal mission is in America, is to take a caste of people within America. And if it's the case that America is so deeply mercantile, so deeply bourgeois, if it's incapable of becoming a warrior like state, a warrior culture, then let's do away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make something completely new and different, which is basically where I kind of step away from a lot of these like ethno-nationalists in America, is because I think they're reactionary in the stupidest sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, my belief is the similar belief that all men of ancient orientations believed, that basically in the ancient world there were castes of men, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had the priests, and then you had the kings and the warriors, and then you had the merchants, and then you had labor.
Right.
And basically my belief is that I think that the coming America will be one of the warrior castes, and which is why I believe that over time an ethnogenesis, which is why I'm not autistic about like questions of ethnicity or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, is because like what I care about most is like, what do you hold in your heart and how do you carry yourself in your life. I think that the modern era has refuted itself in that we have been giving everything people whatever they wanted, especially material wealth, and realized to ourselves that you can stuff your house full of crap, but it will all turn to ashes in your mouth because you have no greater calling. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit too much. I hope that gives you some like circumference as to where I am on the map and why
Mm-hmm.
you and our paths have crossed.
Yeah, dude, I was like struggling to write down all these notes because you brought up so much stuff that I want to touch up upon. And just because it was the last thing you said, I also, obviously, I am an individual who is of mixed race, right? So a lot of times in right-wing circles, you'll see people be like, you're brown or this or that. I'm like, bro, like, dude, I have a public...
No, they're retarded.
Yeah. Like, I have a public profile. I'm here, like, I'm not, like, they, you know the type I'm talking about, like, a lot of them, they'll have some random, like, 1,000 following, 100 followers, and they'll just, comment random bullshit. I always find it funny, because, like, I'll always reply to them. I'll be like, where's your profile, bro? It's very badass of you. And it's like, that's the thing with all this, and you kind of said, it's like the caste, it's the idea of a caste, right? Race is important to the extent that you can look at the average, right? Like, sure, there are racial differences, that's true. However, to judge based purely as like almost like dogma, because that's what ethno-nationalists are essentially doing. They're turning race into this dogma rather than like a science of, okay, well, the Japanese are different than Europeans, whatnot, sure. But they use it as a dogma and an objective morality, which is, to me, so utterly cringe, because it's like the very essence of like if you come from a Nietzschean perspective, it's essentially breaking down dogma and breaking down these sort of almost, I'll call them categorical imperatives in a sense. It's like, it's not about, okay, you could be a fat fucking, you know, and I think Uber Boyo talked about this in a video about like the changes of diets during like industrial England and how all the working classes ended up having like the no jaw look, you know, because they started eating like processed foods and shit, and it's like,
yeah,
and you see these memes where it's like, oh, I'm 100% Anglo, and it's just this fat fucking, you know, dude. I'm like,
wow, disgusting,
right,
disgusting fat bodies. Yeah,
no,
like, go ahead.
Continue. No, I was just gonna say like this is the guy that's like coming up to me, and I make it a very important part of my life to make myself more dangerous, to make myself more physically fit, smart, or whatever. And you have this fat fucking, you know, Anglo bro who's like 300 pounds and still a virgin, right? And he's like trying to tell me I'm inferior to him, and I find that so funny. Which is why I sort of take, you know, this sort of, that's why I gravitate towards guys like Jünger, guys like Evola even, because ultimately, and this is sort of their critique of, for example, the Third Reich. Like, yeah, Third Reich aesthetics on point, right? But at a certain point, there was something sort of anti-European that Evola and Jünger saw in the sort of pure German Völkischism, because it almost becomes a categorical imperative, right? And
it becomes like petty nationalism, which is cringe.
Yes.
And I agree with you, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry, I didn't
No, you're good, sorry. I'm just... You made me think of a lot of cool stuff, but like that's kind of how I view it. Like if you want, ultimately, I think you would agree, I'm not a nationalist, I'm an imperialist in the sense that I think nationalism is... Thank you. I think nationalism is cringe because really nationalism is a product of the Enlightenment, and it's a product of liberalism when you really think about it. And guys like Evola talk about this. Like, to truly want more and to truly have that sort of will towards higher culture, towards higher existence, towards just, you know, that's something more that we kind of feel. It's sort of that inborn will within us, call it a will to power or whatever. It's not towards creating some nation of 20 million people, right? And like, okay, we're gonna fight for our interests, blah blah. No, it's about expansion. It's about mastering space, like BAP talks about. And like this
precisely.
Is right, which is what you're, you know, kind of thing we I think we've kind of briefly touched up upon it today, is like that caste, that warrior caste. It's like we want to be the new Sardaukar, we want to be the new, you know, legions and cohorts of this new Rome or whatever. But that I have that on the notes in case you want to touch up on that. But really quick, and there's a lot of stuff that you made me think about. Just going back to how you said you discovered Mishima. What's interesting is, like, I talked about the vast diversity in the right, and I actually found about Mishima from essentially someone. So you have Groypers, and then you have guys that are even more extreme than Groypers. And I served with this guy. He actually is facing 20 years now in prison because he tried to. So he threw a Molotov cocktail at a Planned Parenthood. Yeah, like,
holy fuck.
Yeah, you can look this up. His name's Chance Brannon. This is all public information. But he threw a Molotov cocktail and he caused $900 of damages, and he's facing 20 years. And I'm like, bro, like that's like you basically threw away your life and didn't even do you didn't even do anything. Anyway, not to shit on him because he's probably gonna he's got a lot of hardship coming his way. But he's like more extreme than a Groyper. Like he's super hardcore Christian. You know, with all the Ethno-Nationalists.
At least you could say you respect him for his dedication. I mean, like, yeah, maybe I wouldn't have. I don't, obviously, you know, feds, I don't approve of that. I'm just saying that at least you can. He's like a Mishima-esque situation. You know what I mean?
I'd say he's more of an Aaron Bushnell kind of guy. Like, you know, like Mishima is the ultimate sacrifice, and then there's like kind of lame sacrifices. It's like, if you're going to do something that throws your life away, you want it to actually have an imprint, right? Which is kind of like, have you ever read Seven Pillars of Wisdom? It's the
I have actually.
Yes, yeah. So I haven't like read it all the way through. I just looked at like little parts, but I don't know if you remember. I think, you know, T. Lawrence talks about the Arab. The Arab doesn't like to throw away his life for nothing. So it was a lot of the issue working with the British doctrine was convincing these Arabs, like, you know, like, we got to go do this, but they only would go in if there was like a reason to like sacrifice. Like, they were brave, however, they wouldn't just throw their lives away. And that's kind of how I feel with sacrifice. Like, sacrifice is important and you need it, but you also don't want to be a freaking idiot like a guy like Bushnell or like, this guy
Yeah.
Chance that I used to know. But I found about Mishima from him because he said Mishima was cringe because obviously he's a extreme groiper, so they don't fuck with that kind of guy. Because I was like talking to him about Evola, and he's like, Evola's overrated, just like Mishima. I'm like, who's Mishima? I look at Mishima, I'm like, I actually fuck with Mishima. But
Yeah.
but yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent. But to bring the conversation back to some discourse, I want to go to what you talked about with a sort of mercantile identity of America, which I think it will make for interesting conversation, because in my last podcast, we were talking about that a lot, and the sort of difference between it's almost like it's not collectivism in the lame.
I listened to it, by the way, just for the record. I thought it was great. You guys have to really listen to this guy's freaking podcast, because I think it's probably the most apt comparison. America isn't Rome as much as it might LARP to. It's Carthage. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, thank you. Promotion of the podcast. Everyone check it out. But it's like I said in the podcast, like we are a mercantile state, and the Phoenicians were a merchant society. They had a warrior class, but it's a warrior class the same way America has a warrior class. It's almost like pushed to the side compared to the actual leadership of the country. Like the Barcas had some political power, but one of the reasons why Hannibal was unsuccessful in taking Rome is because he never got the support from the politicians back in Carthage. So it's like America has so many comparisons, and I won't go into it too much because it's in the podcast that I talk about. So I guess I kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, and maybe we can kind of extrapolate a little bit, because I think that makes for an interesting talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most interesting things about Nietzsche, to bring it even further back, is this idea that he wanted a supra-European case to arise, right? And I thought about that very much to myself, and I extrapolated that to the United States. And for better or for worse, whatever people may care about, I don't really care about the composition. What I care about is the tether of people that become these people, right? And it's clear, I mean, the British thought about this, is they went throughout the world and they recorded all the martial peoples of the world and enumerated among them a bunch of non-quote-unquote Aryan peoples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is also like the Nepalese, which are the Gurkhas, are pretty very famous, obviously the Japanese, obviously a number of other individuals. Most interesting is the people of Myanmar, which is actually pretty cool. But anyway, the long story that I'm trying to make in a kind of circuitous path is that America, for better or for worse, and for those of you who haven't read the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, you would see in their correspondences that people thought I think it was John Adams thought that Boston would turn into the new Sparta, as if these two different polities were different. And as a New Englander myself, you know very well that Boston is full of bourgeois types. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Full of lawyer slash merchant whaler types. I mean, John Hancock is from New England. A lot of the people that rebelled during the Revolution rebelled because of the fact of taxes on their stupid little businesses. Oh my God, they're gonna take my little money. Oh my God, you know what I mean? So it's just the pretenses under which we became a polity are not the same as the ones that I want to incorporate into ours. The ones the city in the future. And I'm sure if you've lurked me enough, you know that I'm a big fan of big Rome guy, big Rome guy. And Rome was founded primarily as a basically citizen body under arms. I mean, really, it was an army before it was anything else. And when Rome was declining, it went through this period called the Dominate. And it should be interesting and revealing to you, the listener, that the legitimacy of Rome and the Roman emperors often came from what? The legions, right? Precisely the barracks emperors, Caracalla and so on, Diocletian and so on. And it doesn't end there. However, it's important to understand that in America, legitimacy is conferred by the bourgeois caste, right? The business caste, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, so on and so forth. and the ethos of democracy, quite the opposite of what David Thoreau believed, or like any of these other primitive anarchists believe, doesn't give rise to the small guy. Actually, democracy falls sway under the oligarchs, the financial oligarchs, because what do oligarchs do, and what is it that the peons of any country fall like sway under is money, is
Mm-hmm.
because the peasant class of any civilization is really motivated by very base desires. This is an
Mm-hmm.
Aristotelian idea, but it's just also just like common sense. Like these people barely are making ends meet. They don't have broad mental horizons, and therefore, their consumption of both media, moral instruction, and base impetus for action. So, like incentives for action is money. Moral instruction comes from the newspapers or their local church at the time. Now it's just basically TikTok. And then later, of course, their information about the wider world is only so wide as their cone of focus. And so that focus is very much restricted, especially because these individuals are of an inferior quality, if that makes sense. They're not
Mm-hmm.
very well educated just by virtue of who they are. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. This is not an indictment. What's the indictment is to put into their hands the legitimacy of any state. And this is where I have the biggest disagreement with most people, is that actually the legitimacy of a state comes from a person's aristocracy. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come from the peon or the drug addict. It doesn't come from those people. It comes from a different set of people who are cut two cuts above the rest. And to me, and if you like, I lived all over the world in my life. I mean, not just saying that, like, as a military brat, like, no. When I lived abroad, I spoke the languages of the locals. I lived in a community that wasn't itself local, if that makes sense. I wasn't living in small town USA base abroad. I was actually exposed to these people. And the commonality is that those of higher moral integrity, those of bearing and command presence, and those that had the moral and spiritual fortitude to overcome all adversity came from this very specific caste of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
All of them invariably came from a military background. And therefore, the reason why the United States is being sold out and easily subverted is because you're putting into the hands of a polity, into the hands of people who would sell their daughters for 30 pieces of silver. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, look at how America has turned out. People have no self-respect. People have no self-respect because the greatest measure of attainment is silver, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that is something I'm trying to overcome. I'm trying to inspire those of the military caste to overcome themselves. And I want life to be more than simply the accumulation of material goods.
Mm-hmm.
I want life to have broad spiritual horizons, which manifest themselves obviously materially, but you can't make great strides materially without, of course, having great spirits and souls. The reason why the early republic and the middle republic were so great in the United States was because fundamentally the leadership came from a military caste, all the way up through, of course, to the Second World War and its
Mm-hmm.
conclusion. And say what you will, of course, of people that believe in democracy, liberalism, and so on. That's fine. I get the critiques. However, they all came from a specific strain of person, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone that has succeeded them has been too weak. And say what you want about Donald Trump. This guy's a fucking like he like skipped out on the war in Vietnam. He basically was a yellow belly. Like
Yeah.
he freaking like was a coward. And like that's so unfortunate. George Bush, the guy that pushed us into two wars that killed a whole bunch of people,
Yeah.
he
National Guard.
he skated. Yeah, he skated the Air National Guard. Like all these people never put their mouth where their money is, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference between us and, like, for instance, the Japanese nobility.
Yes.
The idea that the leader leads from the front. That's the first one to take his licks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely the kind of person that I am trying to build up and idolize and glorify. And the biggest shortcoming, of course, is that we don't have homers. We don't have people singing the praises of this kind of caste spiritual mold of person. There aren't endless popularization of this kind of person, and that's precisely what I'm trying to do at Lance's Legion. Is that I myself, my service or whatever wasn't like interesting or cool or anything. What my aim in life is to glorify and honor those that make that cut, if that makes
Mm.
sense. And so that way generations ahead of me are able to grab onto that tether and build on it. So just like the futurists are probably my favorite people, precisely because they glorify the very things that bourgeois society hates, right?
Mm-hmm.
They glorify pain, they glorify war, they glorify masculinity, and so on. These very essences, which are the antithesis of modern bourgeois liberal lifestyles. And when I say liberal, by the way, I don't mean just progressive liberal. People have to understand that America was founded as a liberal state.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why they just call it conservative, right? I'm not a conservative because I'm not trying to conserve liberalism as such. I'm trying to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like this clash between classical liberalism, which is always losing, and progressive liberalism, which is always winning. Because of course, becoming always trumps being. You must always be becoming so you can become the being. I don't know. That's kind of like a kind of abstract idea right there, but I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of shotgun style over like a wide area, but I hope that cone addresses your question.
No, that was really good. And like just like the last thing or your intro, I have a lot of stuff to say based on that because you said a lot of good things. So let me think where to start. First of all, I think where to start is I always say it too. Like people, like especially a lot of times, I'll say some like anti-Marxist stuff, and naturally a bunch of libertarians will come in and be like, yeah, kick down Marxism. I'm like, yeah, but I'm also not you guys. Like, and they're like, oh, you're not like a modern liberal. I'm like, no, I'm not a modern liberal. I'm not a classic liberal either. And this is like like a lot of my family, like the smart people in my family, are smart, but they're still like classical liberals, like my my uncle, they're in academia. My uncle's a college professor. My dad, he's like a software.
Yeah, my dad's a nuclear engineer, but he's not retarded enough to be me, which is someone with strong opinions on the internet.
Right? Yeah, I know, they're so superior. The boomer ideology, But
yeah.
But like they're all classical liberals, and like they are smart people, but they're stuck in the dogma of classical liberalism. Like, no, if only we go back to that liberalism. So they're almost reactionaries in a sense too, which I find funny, and which is what I want to bring up is like I also have an issue with the term reactionary, and this is where I stray from someone like Evola because ultimately it's kind of like you said, like overcoming, right? Everything's always about overcoming. Evola's biggest critique of Nietzsche, I think, and to an extent, is because Evola believed in this this traditionalist structure of society, whereas Nietzsche says, he says that metaphysics. I think I might be paraphrasing. I think
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, I can't quite get
Go
the
ahead.
quote right, but it's essentially along the lines of like metaphysics is the doctrines of which we build upon, right? Like you have to build upon the past. You have to look to the traditional societies where you had a warrior caste at the top. You have to look to them, but ultimately, I think the failure of these reactionary movements is the idea that everything is already perfected and you can't bring it forward to a new age. And this is why, like guys like Jünger, you mentioned futurism. I would consider Jünger, and you could disagree because I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, but I would consider Jünger a futurist, no? Mm-hmm. Right? So, in a sense.
So I guess it depends. It depends, but like it depends on the time of his life. But you like this is like actually like blah blah. I'm not going to do that to you. But yeah, largely speaking, yeah.
At least with like I would say On Pain, for example, The Worker. These come across. I mean, I'm not
Steel.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I'm not super well versed on futurism like you are, but I would like for my understanding of futurism, I would say like, these books, like you said, they sort of they take all these anti-liberal ideals, like pain, warfare, suffering, all these things, and it's like, no, these are actually virtues. But I also believe in this sort of overcoming of just pure traditionalism, pure reactionary ideology, because I think, yes, we have to look to the past.
Precisely.
But we still have to overcome them, which is why Evola, I have a lot of issues with him, even though I think it's really interesting to read him, and he has a lot of good stuff. But going back to some of the other stuff you mentioned, and I wrote a lot of stuff down because there's a lot of stuff to unpack from what you said, but one that I wanted to bring up is you talked about everybody's doing everything for silver, essentially, right? Like people are marrying their daughters off for economic incentives, whatever, and it brings
Marrying their daughters off. You know what they're doing? They're putting them on OnlyFans. They don't even
some of them
care.
are, yeah. That's like
Yeah, exactly.
that's even worse. But it reminds me of, and you know, you're big, you've read Bronze Age Mindset. I forget if it's in. It might be in Selective Breeding. I can't remember if it's in Bronze Age Mindset or Selective Breeding, but essentially, Bap or Costin or whatever talks about the idea of reproducing for beauty and how that's sort of been lost over time throughout history. Like people used to reproduce, like the Greeks, for example, and I think this is Selective Breeding. Like they would reproduce to create this stronger, smarter, more beautiful type of human. And this is originally how the Indian caste system was supposed to operate when the Aryan invaders came down during the Vedic period. And one of the reasons why India is so diluted today is because they started marrying between the caste for money and for economic incentives. And this is, I think, what you're sort of has to do with what you're talking about. It's this idea of you have reproduction for beauty, reproduction for the future to create this stronger, virile, new generation, and then it gets diluted because merchants essentially they manipulate finances. It doesn't clearly reflect pure capabilities. Like people can find their way. This fat, bastard.
You win the lotto. Sure. So you're rich.
Right. Like there's so many different ways it can happen, and ultimately, money is not a reflection necessarily, and this is not a Marxist kind of money's bad sort of thing because that's gay. But like this is a right-wing perspective on the negative influences of
Yes.
the financial manipulators is that they're going to dilute the pool. There's a reason why the Greeks, for example, like even in Athens, democracy, birthplace of democracy. No, they were democratic, but they were aristocratic. They were an aristocratic democracy. Only like. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but let's say like 20-30% of the population of the city-state were actually, the citizens. You had the labor class, you had the freeman class who were like the merchants, whatever. You had all these different classes. Most of them were not citizens. The citizen, the individual who is carved from marble and turned into this higher type of man, that is through very select and very specific and I would say almost reflective of nature. It's to create this genetically superior being, and this is something that when you allow the merchant class to sort of get more power within a society, and today we have an economic elite essentially running the country, you have this dilution of what were once heroes carved from marble, and now you have you have essentially ugly people and dumb people and fat people, whatever, right? So it's like. And another thing is like now you have all this bullshit like look at the Kardashians, like they're all fucking mid, and then we do all these surgeries and everything, so you can almost buy beauty now. In Korea, everyone, it's like the plastic surgery capital, so it's like everything's being abstracted from the natural sort of drives which people want to be beautiful, people want to be this, that, want to be healthy, and that's sort of abstracted with economic society, let's call it. And like you said, World War II, I think, was the last time the warrior class really had a stake in America. Back, World War II on, you don't have generals running for president anymore. And you had that a lot throughout the past. You had Eisenhower, MacArthur tried to run, Grant, whatever. You had all these guys. So to be a part of the warrior class meant something. But the depoliticization of the military, which is a hallmark of liberal society, I think backfires tremendously. The leadership today of the chief of staff or whatever, all the guys at the top, they get there by not threatening the establishment. They get there by minding their P's and Q's. They're not innovative. They're not new. They're not young and virile. They're all 70-year-old dudes who they had to adopt these negative traits essentially that don't actually lead to a stronger society. They take these weak traits, so then you're going to dilute the leadership of a country. And you would agree with this obviously, but to finish off my point, because I'm going off a little bit.
No. I have all the time in the world, by the way, so I don't really give a fuck. I love this. This is what I live for. So.
For sure. Well, I gotta check myself, because all my friends know, I fucking, my roommate's right here, he's laughing. I always go off on, these long tangents about philosophy and shit, so I gotta check myself, but I'll finish off before we...
No, please don't. You know why? There's so many fucking losers out there that couldn't even parse a sentence together, so everyone can go fuck themselves. So who cares?
Well, I mean,
We're
like,
not-
I want to get your input
ahead,
too.
go
I don't
ahead.
want to
Please
just
continue.
monologue. I want to like make sure we're bouncing ideas off. But to finish my monologue, I'll say like this, like, and you said you listened to the last podcast. I don't know if you remember the specific point, but I actually bring this a lot up in a lot of my podcasts. Is the song "Fortunate Son," right? Right? That's essentially what has happened to our leadership in this country. We have the fortunate son, the Trumps, the Bushes, who get out of the war. These are the leaders of our country. The leaders aren't leading from the front. They're not fighting at the front. The consuls of Rome had 1 year to go and fucking conquer some Germanic tribe. And if they failed, they fucking fell upon their own gladius. You had, the medieval knights even and kings, like, how many kings died in battle because they fucking charged in the front with the rest of their soldiers?
Right.
They led the peasants fought, sure, but the peasants fought behind the knights. The knights led them directly. Now, because we are a the merchant class run society, like the working classes are fighting without higher leadership. Like now, essentially, the officer class is the middle class that can afford to go to college or whatever. So it tries to replicate that same sort of distinction, but it's completely different. Like why? And you said you read The Prince a lot growing up, and so I'm gonna tie it back to The Prince. Machiavelli, as you know, says you can't rely upon a mercenary force or like a foreign force to win the wars for you. Because essentially it's like he who does the fighting has the actual real power. At a certain point, all these abstractions like money and like fake government structures that are built upon written laws, they don't mean shit when it comes down to pure physical power. So you can never truly rely on another fighting force to go and win the wars for you. And I think this is why there's so much. This is like a wider issue, but I think one of the reasons there's so much social unrest today is that we don't have leaders that lead from the front anymore. We have leaders that rule on subversion, and they rule on these fake concepts that don't actually exist in a physical form. Like, people are like, oh, human rights, whatever. No, it's privileges, and Nietzsche talks about this too. I think in the Antichrist, we operate on privileges based on power, not rights. There are no rights. Every right is a privilege of power. So when people treat legal rights like dogma, they forget, how did we win those legal rights? We won them through blood, sweat, and suffering. And that's,
Precisely.
I could go on. It fucking pisses me off, like, how we've become. But anyway, I got to hear your thoughts, because I'm going to go on if I don't stop myself.
So, no, it's okay. And I actually enjoy this because it's so refreshing how rare a conversation like this is. Most people, quote unquote people, their mental horizons extend from TikTok to CNN or Fox News to whatever. And basically you have to understand, Mussolini understood this, is that many is a woman. Okay, even men, most men that you meet, they're not actually men, they're just women, and women want to be ravished, they want to be told what to do. And that's the same thing with men in leadership and equestrianism and so on. But one of the most impactful passages that I've ever come across was Dante. And one of the most telling things that he told us, is that liars and heretics were doomed to a circle of hell, that they would walk eternally with their heads smushed back, so completely 180 backwards, and they had to walk forwards. I think this is really important because people like Evola, I don't personally, I think he's important, you should read him. But this is why I don't like reactionaries, I don't like conservatives, because ultimately you must be a constant becoming towards something, a city on a distant hill. And that's why left-wing progressives are actually incredibly effective. It's just because they use the same mechanism you'd use going to the gym. You first start weak, you become strong progressively, right? So too does everything else. It doesn't happen one fell swoop. It doesn't happen in cycles or some weird shit. It happens by simply every day incrementally changing towards the ideal you have in your heart. I think people looking to the past for answers to the future might be just misguided. Yes, use it for the ethos. Yes, use it for inspiration. However, in means of achieving the city that you're trying to conquer, be prudent. Survey the landscape before you, spiritually, physically, You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
the unique circumstances we live under now are unique, and you must act uniquely. You cannot act by a certain, like, you can maybe extrapolate rules of thumb,
Mhm.
which is why we study military history as military leaders and so
Right.
on. However, the rules of thumb are only they only go so far. They only extend so far, right? And therefore, it's important to understand that same thing extrapolated to spirituality. It's the same thing extrapolated to X, Y, and Z. And I'm not a Hegelian myself or anything like that, but that's precisely why Hegel um, was basically believing in this idea of constant progress, because as time goes on, we reconcile with our antitheses and correct ourselves and then become closer to God
Mhm.
by experiences of life. And that's just a very long way. Don't read Hegel. Don't waste your fucking time. Um, but read Nietzsche. He's actually really cool. But I'm trying to elucidate something to you, the listener, is precisely this: is that basically we're predators. There's a reason why our eyes are anatomically fixed to the fore of our brain, like not the sides, like prey. Because we're looking for a target. You must provide your brain with a target. That target is an idealization, of course. And for the founding fathers, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, equality, and so on. For me, it's something quite else, and it's derived precisely from that warrior ethos, right? Is honor, courage, the pursuit of excellence. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And what these things mean, well, I'll delegate it to you to discover it and put forth the best argument, and to, most importantly, not just an argument, not just a word cell, but to act on those thoughts, and to see how they work out in the real world. But the larger question that I'm trying to say, so you talked about Evola, and I kind of I shun away from that. I believe this. I believe in being firm in principles, prudent in approach, so flexible in approach,
Mhm.
and that's the most beautiful thing about the futurists, because as much as the futurists hate to believe that they are connected with their Roman past,
Mhm.
they are very quintessentially Roman in their way of being pragmatic. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And letting the past fall away behind them and seize the future. And that's probably why they are so culturally impactful, beyond, of course, the what academia would concede as their impact in general in history.
Mhm.
But I guess, I wanted to talk about your rant, but like I was trying to remember the middle part of what you were talking about, your question. So just like, what was the middle part? Like, so I wanted to answer all three because they were all three really good questions. What was the middle part that you were talking about?
For sure. I wrote them down. So see what I mentioned. I mentioned sort of reproducing for beauty, the sort of BAP
Mm.
constant thing. I mentioned. Was that
Okay.
it?
No, I got it. I got it. I got it.
Okay,
I
cool.
got it. General Lance is getting hammered every time your boy is getting hammered, so it's a little bit hard to remember. But I think everyone. So I have like a central book reading list, 5 books, because I know soldiers don't like wasting their time fucking reading like nerds. I respect that too, but I think there are some things that could accentuate your soul, and Plutarch on Sparta is namely one of them. And he talked about this idea, this concept that like being anti-capitalist, but anti-Marxist in the sense that you're anti-slave,
Hmm.
but anti-capitalist in the sense that it compromises on the warrior ethos. I myself see myself as a Spartan. I really don't give a fuck about material goods. I really don't care about wealth or like showing it off or whatever. What I care about is power. What I care about is excellence. What I care about is when I go outside, I'm not confronted by the disgusting lack of discipline in people's bodies. Like
Hmm.
obesity is not the mark of like some kind of illness or something. Even Ronaldo, the guy with hypoglycemia, was able to keep the pounds off. It's without medication, by the way. The way that you overcome that is discipline. I
Hmm.
believe in discipline. I believe in pain. I believe, and this is, in a way, I respect your boy, but another way, this is why I hate Christianity specifically,
Hmm.
is because even the Spartans understood that the poorly turned out need to be taken outside of the gene pool. You need to be willing to do pretty quote unquote barbaric things to serve something greater, to be something greater than your generation or your time and your family and so on. And the way you do that is just like a gardener. You prune the fucked up branches on a tree to make sure the tree grows up. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And one of the beautiful things that Plato says, I have ambivalent about him, but he says that we labor for a tree whose shade we'll never enjoy, and that is something that merchant society really doesn't understand. And you can see it as the PRC is really good at the United States, because the United States can't think in terms of hundreds of years. It can't even think in terms of 10 years. It thinks in terms of the next 2 years, which is the election cycle in the United States, actually. So, or, the House of Representatives, the House of, the Senate, and whatever. And so the way that you overcome this is basically relegating the perioikoi, which is what they are, the merchant class, to their rightful place. And it's extremely telling, and another reason why I love the Japanese is that they place the bourgeoisie
at the bottom.
At the bottom. They place them under the peasant, because I think that the peasant actually does confer something more congenial and good for the greater social politic, because the merchant is always scheming.
Yes.
He's basically, like, his entire idea is about stealing. Whether you like it or not, people don't understand this, but when communists make the argument of labor-derived value of goods, they kind of are almost half right.
Yeah.
They're half right in the sense that the added value that you basically charge on top of a product to make it happen, that's entirely avarice, that's licentiousness, that's economic rent, which, for those of you that don't know this term, it's a term in economics that denotes someone that charges more than it would be necessary to be profitable, because, I don't know, how do you say this? Because they can. So Beyonce, wants to do a concert, right? Let's say she wants to do a concert at NYC. It costs a certain amount, and then you put another 10% on top of the profits. That would be considered rightful profit, profiteering or whatever. Economic rent is when you're able to charge, instead of $100 a ticket, you say, you know what, you're going to pay me $10,000 and you're going to do it, you fucking retard. And they do, and they pay it. And that's what America is. It's economic rent. It's Gordon Gekko avarice. And I think I agree with the communists in a certain extent, the Marxists, because it is repulsive.
Yes.
It's repulsive. Like, imagine being so pettily obsessed with things, with gold. I mean, aren't we supposed to be a Christian nation? One of the very few good things about Christianity is that it is repelled by this idea of the merchant, the most disgusting person. I mean, it's true. It would be more likely that a camel goes through the eye of a needle than a rich man be seen by the eye of God. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And I don't know. I have a lot of personal bones to pick, but as you can see, the scope of my cultural project is so wide and so difficult that it may just be worth my time and your time as well. So it's actually really fun. But like, I totally agree with you. I've had that same experience too, of synergizing with libertarians, but libertarians, liberals or conservatives or whatever they fuck call themselves nowadays, losers. They don't understand how to understand the discrepancy. They don't understand the world beyond a dyad, which is, are you right wing? And never mind you, of course, that right wing, which is the term that we inherited from the French Revolution.
Yes.
We are to the right of the libertarians because we are right next to the king. We are the warrior aristocracy that supported him in that parliament of the Grand Estates. They were actually part of the radical faction, the sans-culottes. Specifically, these people are left-wing people themselves. They don't understand that. Obviously, because most people are stupid anyway, so I don't even waste my time. I just kind of have a contempt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I hope that answers your question. or at least gives you kind of an insight into my heart as to like how I see things, and it's precisely why I'm here with you today, because I think you have a good instinct for the way of the future, right? And for me, it's this breeding project of warriors from across the world, maybe, like the entire warrior caste, just like the Spartans, you know, and to be germinated into this great thing that exceeds beyond the parameters of yesteryear. You know what I mean? Maybe the greatest case to have ever existed, and that's something that I've been working towards very much in my personal life.
Right. We have to create the new Sardaukar.
That's right.
But except yeah. I fucking love that. It's so badass. Yeah.
Isn't it?
I know, right? We gotta bring back throat singing into the future. Like
dude, facts, brother.
Yeah.
Mongols in space. I love Genghis Khan. No, and here's the final thing, by the way.
Yeah.
And this is why I harp on it so much, and why I love Jünger. And it's the philosophy of pain.
Yeah.
Jünger is the one that says, he says, tell me your relationship with pain, and I'll show you who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most evocative thing I've ever heard, and which why I love the Marine Corps specifically, because it has such a positive. Well, it used to.
Yeah,
now it's all like
it's a little bit.
Else,
yeah, I could get into that.
yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that bourgeois society is founded off of the idea that you experience pain so that way next year you can feel pleasure. And then of course the communists, they just want to feel pleasure now. For me, I want to offer you a life of pain. I want to offer you a life of pain, never-ending pain, but a type of accreting pain, a type that actually builds you up, the pain of discipline, the pain of self-overcoming. Because people don't understand this, but I mean, assuming you people are scientific and smart enough to believe in evolution, the neurological development of organisms actually started with pain avoidance. Sentience begins with pain. It doesn't begin with pleasure. And actually euphoria is the catharsis of the absence of pain, which is something people don't understand, and which is why people fall into the cycle of vice beyond simply what they're used to. And the reason why I believe in pain is because pain is just like Heraclitus says. It's the bow that the more pain you can embrace, the farther forward you're able to fling your arrow, your soul. You know, the bullet of your soul.
Yeah.
And the issue of today is an issue of pain and our relationship with it. We believe that those that are in pain somehow are better than us is like, no, my friend, that is just normal, and you better be better at like overcoming that pain. In fact, you like being so sensitive to how this, oh my god, my daddy left me when I was a kid, oh my god, you know, I have daddy issues. Like, dude, you don't even know the half of it. There's people fucking starving in Somalia. I remember this dude, there's this pretty metal dad. He cut off his own leg, no anesthesia, nothing, to feed his family.
Jesus
you don't
Christ.
know anything. If you're in America, you don't know nothing of poverty. You know nothing of pain. You're a coward. And until you are able to actually ascribe a positive value to pain, only then do you come to master the world. And that's the ideal that why I love the Romans. You know, you read in Nietzsche, the 1001 goals. Every people has a goal, right? For the Romans, it was self-tyranny. It was basically being a tyrant of others, you know, being the absolute dictator of others, but also being the absolute dictator of your passions, yourself, which is why the Stoics were so popular amongst the Roman aristocracy, because Stoicism hinges on this idea of self-mastery, on self-abnegation, willful self-abnegation in the furtherance of self-mastery.
Right.
And that is something I'm trying to birth onto the American, because I think the Americans are capable of that. However, we are misled because of bad actors, because of people who are the most disgusting merchant class type people. And it's, by the way, just as a corollary before I hand it off to you, it's kind of why I like Elon Musk, is because though he is very rich, he's not very rich because he's a merchant, like, devious little cunt. It's actually because he wants to do stuff with his wealth, like, that doesn't bring that doesn't bring immediate rewards. Like,
Mhm.
for instance, going to Mars. People are like,
Right.
why do you want to go to Mars? It's like,
Why wouldn't
you
you?
wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like, my reasons are beyond your comprehension. It's so pathetic. Like, why would you waste all that money? It's like, you little ant, you
Mhm.
insect, you animal. Like, no. This is beautiful, to do things that don't have immediate benefit just for the sake of its own greatness.
Mhm.
Imagine thinking that going amongst the stars and landing on Mars, you think that is not enough of a reason? That's how small these people are, and it's precisely this existential threat that is following the West today, that we're under the rulership of these spiritual women who
Mhm.
don't understand that life is greater than simply feeling happy. Life is greater than simply accumulating wealth. Life is about greatness, and that is precisely why I think many of in our sphere, regardless of your nation. I mean, I just was speaking to my friend. He's like living in fucking, excuse me. He was living in Kyrgyzstan.
Oh
You know what I
wow.
mean? It's like, yeah, it's really interesting. Is like this like transnational caste of men and
Mhm.
women who want to exceed the boundaries of what is life today. And
Yeah.
so anyway, I just leave it there because I think I've been monologuing for too long. But do you understand me?
Yeah. No.
Do you understand, Anon?
I wrote a bunch of stuff based on what you said, which I'll bring up. But before I go on, I say what we do is we start a PMC, and we get all these, all the individuals who feel a will towards being a part of the warrior caste. We start a PMC, and we find some like developing country without a significant military, and I think we invade. What do you think? We need a
No
homeland for the
comment.
warrior
No
caste.
comment.
Anyway, but in all seriousness, so
No, I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I think Eric Prince. I don't know if you've heard the interview between him and Bap.
I saw
Very
I
enlightening.
still have to listen to it, but I saw the post.
Yeah, obviously don't comment on this, but I just don't know why people don't think about that idea, but like I don't know, like march on like DC. I don't know. Like why not? Like I think the most interesting thing about I don't know if you watched The Death of Stalin.
No, I haven't.
So it's this movie about the transition of power from Stalin to Andropov or some shit like that. Some
Mhm.
dude, some like faceless guy, but point being is the whole power dynamic, right?
Mhm.
And one of the most interesting factions fighting, between Khrushchev and Beria was that Beria was in charge of the secret police, the NKVD, like the rats, the police. I hate
Mhm.
police. I not because of what they did for me, but the kind of person that is attracted to that kind of work is a
Mhm.
skeevy and duplicitous individual. Like, it's not a warrior, because a warrior is honest. He bares his chest to you. He says, "Here I am. Here I stand. I'm going to kill you straight up." He's not going to do this fucking skeevy shit that police officers do and so
Mhm.
on, or the feds do. And then, of course, on the other side is Khrushchev. Khrushchev was, a man of the people, blah blah blah. But most importantly, he had the army on his side, and then
Yeah.
you had the veterans of the world wars, blah blah blah. Point being is that like when Khrushchev did the counter coup, all the NKVD officers, their little assholes got puckered, and then they gave way to the army.
Mhm.
And it precisely is that way because fundamentally, the police officers and feds are cowards. That's what
Mhm.
they are. That's why they can't bear their enemies straight face to face. They always have to be overwhelming odds. They always have to use duplicity against a much weaker enemy and defeat him in detail.
Mhm.
And remember, of course, the NKVD is the reason why millions of people have died in the great purges of Stalin, and they're the reason why like millions more were imprisoned in the gulags, and it's millions. It's the reason why God damn the guy that went to fucking wrote the Gulag Archipelago. What's his goddamn name?
I don't
Anyway,
know.
his name escapes me. Point being is, these people are always so brave, so full of themselves when things are going their way. But when an enemy presents himself in equal measure to him,
Mhm.
it's 1-for-1 combat ratio. Watch them fucking scuttle away, tuck their little tails behind their fucking legs like cowards.
Mhm.
You know, It is why like historically people don't respect torturers. This is why historically people don't respect prisoners. Like there's a reason why executioners in the medieval era wore masks, is
Right.
because it's something very deeply shameful.
Hmm.
It's deeply shameful because the man under you doesn't have a chance to fight back.
Right.
It's just the measure of a coward who that person is. But anyway, long story short is that I'm basically I believe that this middle caste of people is easily overcome. The
Hmm.
most difficult thing we must like cultivate is the spirit inside, is that generations of bourgeois lifestyle and easy living
Hmm.
has made us all cowards. And it's just not just in the United States. I mean, I lived in Latin America, same thing. Europe, same thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I think that we should become more courageous, and which is why I think the battlefield is precisely here on the internet,
Hmm.
winning the hearts and souls of men and women to embrace pain over pleasure. And
Right.
that is so difficult because people like you and me, we're trying to sell, hey, I think you should eat broccoli and chicken breast for the rest of your life. And the enemy is trying to say, hey, you should eat this little delicious piece of cake. Look how delicious it is. You should just, forget the fact that you're turning into a fat body. Just to eat this delicious little piece of cake. Eat it, eat
Hmm.
it, eat it. Even though if it destroys them,
Hmm.
we are trying to build them up.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the pleasure of that is so abstract and so in the future.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That it kind of, for the masses, it's something that's just beyond their horizon, you know?
Right.
But I hope that I gave you enough to talk about
Oh,
there. But
plenty.
that's kind of like one of my main convictions, you know?
Yeah. Before I go back to the stuff you were mentioning earlier that I want to go back to, I just want to say, like, I think that's, you look at the Japanese sort of conception of suicide with like harakiri and stuff. I think, kind of going back to what you said about execution, it was
Oh,
always
wait. I'm sorry. But like that's the other thing too.
Hmm.
You know what the most beautiful thing, and this is why, like I actually love women. You know
Hmm.
why? Because we talk about harakiri,
Oh, you're talking about
but when
patriotism?
GIs took over, yeah, GIs took over Okinawa. You know
Yeah,
what
they all
happened?
went with them.
Women took their babies in their chest and they fell off cliffs as opposed to, falling to the depredations of the enemy.
Yeah.
Instead of being raped and being safe,
Hmm.
they chose death. And that is beautiful to me. That's the kind of woman that I want. That's the kind of nation that I want. And
Yeah.
I honor those Japanese individuals so much, because that is the like that, like, honestly, when I read that, it brought a tear to my eye,
Hmm.
and I was just like, that is beautiful.
Right.
That is warrior. That is the next level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember, like, this pencil neck was telling me, they could have surrendered, they'd be fine. No. Whenever GIs took over places, as
Hmm.
opposed to the propaganda that were fed, in France, we quote unquote liberated France. Guess what?
Hmm.
There was a bunch of GIs raping French women.
Right.
Same thing in Japan.
Berlin.
Same thing everywhere. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
nature of war.
Hmm.
So the difference is, though, the Japanese woman preferred death over dishonor, and
Yeah.
that is beautiful to me. And I just wanted to make sure that the readership, the listenership, understands what I mean by
Hmm.
international warrior elite. I can honor even those people who ostensibly were my ancestors' enemies.
Hmm.
That is beautiful.
Right.
That's worthwhile. And honestly, like, it's a big shame. One of the biggest shames that America's ever had was, like, basically castrating a beautiful country. You know what I mean? A beautiful people.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead.
Dude, I both love and hate these monologues because they're so. I hate that I have to keep writing new stuff because, like, you bring up so much good stuff that I want to extrapolate on. So, God, there's so much stuff. All right, right off the bat, though.
It's okay. We have tons of time,
Yeah, we do.
brother. I don't give a fuck.
So, off the bat, where I was going with the seppuku thing was the fact that it's a consensual thing. Like, this is an individual that wants to die rather than face shame, whereas the executioner has to wear the thing because, it's like you said, they don't have a chance to fight back. Whereas the
Yeah, he has to wear the head condom. Yeah.
yeah, whereas the samurai,
Yeah.
he wants to die. He'd rather die than face defeat. And really quick, something before I go on to the more important points. There's something I was thinking about, and why sports can be kind of lame sometimes, and why, at least with MMA, or even in MMA to an extent. But I was thinking, because I'm a
Did
big...
you watch the big game?
Yeah, well, that's what I was
Did
gonna
you watch the big game?
No, it's funny because this is where I'm going. This is where I'm going to go to. So, like, I'll admit, I watch sports. I'm a big 49ers fan my whole life, whatever. And I was
So
fucking...
you watched the big game?
No, I did.
My
I
God.
did.
No.
No, but listen. Here where I'm going with this. So, I watched the game. I was fucking depressed afterwards, and I was thinking to myself, people in fucking antiquity never got depressed after losing because they'd be dead. This idea of living as a loser, living in shame, is a very modern concept. If this sports game was like had some sort of tie to reality, me along with the entire 49ers team would just fucking kill ourselves afterwards, or just die in the fucking sports. I was thinking, this feeling of shame that I have, that my team that I identify with lost, it wouldn't exist in a certain kind of world. And like I'm slightly shit posting, but I kind of want to see a world where you don't live as a loser. You either win or you die. There's something pure about that, like...
I like that, and I just want to push back just a little bit, because as much as it is beautiful in a military setting, and Mishima's sacrifice is beautiful, I think one of the biggest double-edged sword situation about that is that genetic strain of person that's willing to do so is lost.
Interesting.
And who's left? Cowards.
Right.
Cowards and peasants. And so I get what you're saying, and I think one of the most interesting illusions in the West, which is probably closer to my viewership's, like, I guess, the audience's specific cultural familiarity, is Rome, right? Like, they lost the battle to Hannibal at Cannae. It was just like such a crazy loss. It was like Soviet levels worth of like lost Romans dying to a man. And the consul, who was the general, came back and decided to fight again.
Right.
The durability of fighting. And so obviously there's a certain level of shame that comes from loss. And of course death is better than living on in shame. However, the way I see it is it's just like the Roman sides. Like, no, you don't give up. And like, yes, it's death or dishonor. However, you will not commit suicide until this war is over. If the war is over, then you're done.
Right.
And I think the coolest thing is that, for instance, Cato the Younger, who was fighting against the forces of Caesar in the first triumvirate, right? The first civil war.
Yeah.
Killed himself because he knew the war was over,
Right.
but to go on living as a slave was impossible. However, there are certain circumstances where if you can fight another day,
absolutely,
then it's okay to not like turn off yourself.
No,
you know what I mean?
That's a good distinction. Yeah,
there needs to be a little bit of judgment. It's about judgment.
Right.
It's like that saying, the Japanese, good initiative, bad judgment.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I can respect someone doing that, but I'm like, maybe it'd be better if you fought on another day,
Yeah, no, I obviously I agree with that. I guess more of what I meant is like kind of like what you said, when you really lose your freedom completely, because obviously you can lose the battle, win the war. I'm not saying everybody kill yourself after we lose the battle, but to me it's more so kind of like what you described, like the Japanese women or the French women, these women in Berlin, they would have been raped and all this shit afterwards. Like I'm more so advocate like the idea of, if you kind of go back to Twilight of the Idols, which I actually think, after I read Twilight of the Idols, I'm like, Bronze Age mindset, I think, is most influenced by Twilight of the Idols, because there's this idea of, in both books, the idea of what makes someone a noble is being in control of their death, right? The idea of dying rather than living as a slave, like either winning and being free or dying as opposed to slavery. And so when I say like death over like dishonor, it's not like death in the battle, right? You can always fight on, you can always move forward. It's more like I've run back to my home, the enemy is pursuing me, I'm there with my family, and I know that if we go on living, they'll be sold or raped or worse, whatever, right? And like that to me is like you take death
It's
over
a different
dishonor.
dynamic, right?
Yeah,
Right? It's a different dynamic, of
mhm.
course.
It's more so like when there's no chance of victory anymore, where living means losing all your dignity, losing that noble life. That's, I think, more so what I'm getting at. So yeah, obviously, the Roman resilience, losing multiple battles to Hannibal, continuously raising another army of 50,000. Oh, we got slaughtered. Fuck it, we're going
Another
back
one.
in. Yeah,
DJ Khaled, another one.
right. Yeah, that kind of resilience. Yeah, obviously, I don't want my army killing themselves after that. But yeah, I mainly mean like kind of. I think it's kind of funny. You remember that scene in Downfall where Hitler was like essentially saying like everybody should, this is my cowardly Aryan race or whatever. Why don't they fight to the death? Like he would have been more suited to have a Japanese nation under his control, because they would have all fought to the death if Berlin was getting invaded. That's just something funny I thought about.
Yeah.
Where he's like saying, "Oh, how could they? They deserve to be conquered."
I mean, it's true. I mean, also, in all fairness, though, they're like it's not talked about in the media just because it would be bad publicity for the Allies. But
Mhm.
like there were like the SS and a number of like Hitlerjugend like fought to the death. It was the main Prussian corps, the ostensible military caste of the Germans that surrendered. So,
Right.
I mean, obviously it's like half and half.
Yeah.
Obviously like not so great that he asked them to do that, but it's also like interesting to note that there were people that did that. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's half and half. But I hear what you're saying. So what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say like before I was pretty much done with that point. I was gonna go back to some of the other things you mentioned, but I was gonna say like I think the
Yeah,
difference.
go for it.
Yeah, the difference though is that I think take your typical SS guy and their level of fanaticism. That was the average Japanese IGA. Like it wasn't just
For a fact.
Yeah.
For a fact.
like and just imagine how crazy the Kempotai must have been if your average IGA guy was as fanatic as the SS, which was like the most fanatic, right? So I think the Japanese.
Dude, I love the Japanese, dude. Like it's unreal. Like obviously like they're not my people, but like I
Mhm.
respect them so much, man. Like I love them, dude. They're great. Like they remind you what it means to be a human being. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and like I definitely have reasons to hate the Japanese if I wanted to, because like I'm half Filipino, and like even my white grandmother was in the Philippines during World War II. So like she was in a concentration
see.
camp, and then of course my two Filipino grandparents were also getting fucked around with, but like I look
Right.
past that because of there's a lot of ugliness to what the Japanese did during World War II. Like I'm not dismissing any of that. Like I think there is something not heroic about massacring. Like I believe that you have to do what you have to do in war, for example, right? Like sometimes innocents will have to die. You're gonna have to fucking
Right.
blow up buildings to kill the enemy. However, I think there's a certain degree of ugliness in things like the rape of Nanking and the specific acts that were taken out there. There's something anti-heroic to me in doing something like ultimately heroism to me, and like greatness and a beautiful expression of power, is conquering the unconquerable. And I think at a certain point, I even understand like you will have to do certain things, but also the manner of how you do things. Like a lot of people will like
Reflect on you.
what's
I
up?
see what you're saying.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
even compare.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you even compare, and I don't want to get into this stuff, but just because like I don't like comparing like, oh, these people were worse than that person, all that bullshit. But if we look at the way that the Japanese massacred civilians compared to the way the Germans did, there's a lot difference. The Germans were very, I don't want to, obviously I'm not going to say humane,
Clinical.
but they're clinical. Yeah, there wasn't like
Yeah.
usually they weren't finding joy and cruelty in doing what they did. They saw it as a necessity. So even in the death camps, which a lot of fucking killing was done, obviously, but there was a clinicalness to it. There was like, all right, we have a goal, we're gonna fulfill this goal. Whereas I think the Japanese do sort of revel in the cruelty and things like the rape of Nanking, and that's something that I will say I don't personally like. I understand like taking like the Romans.
Why it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the Romans will go and raid these tribes and take their women and stuff, but like that's gonna happen. But what the type of shit that the Japanese were doing like was pretty fucking heinous. Like they were fucking raping like 6-year-old girls and
flinging
shit.
little babies and
Yeah.
throwing in the air and like catching them and stuff. Yeah, and like I get what you're saying, brother, and I think like I hesitate what I say next because it's never popular amongst anyone, but
Hmm.
I think it bears. I have to say it because I'm a partisan of truth, right?
Hmm.
How does the Iliad end? The Iliad ends with the rape of women, the killing of men, and the dashing of toddlers' brains across the walls
Hmm.
of Troy.
Right.
That is just how war is,
Hmm.
and I think, unfortunately, if you're unable to do those heinous, terrible things, you're unable to do the glorious and great things.
Hmm.
Just like Nietzsche talks about, like a tree to grow towards the light must grow ever deeper down into the roots of evil. And this is why, like, our little faction of truth over here is beyond good and evil, is because precisely we must balance these things, and every echelon of evil we remand ourselves from is every echelon of greatness we also fail to achieve.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not saying like you know, I'm a human fucking being. A
Yeah.
lot of these things are disgusting. I hate like pedophiles. I hate fucking people that kill innocent people. Obviously,
Hmm.
I'm a fucking human being. So I say that with certain reservations, and I understand there needs to be like some kind of fucking, it's not an Animal House
Yeah.
situation. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I think I refuse to also do antithesis, which is to, you know, um, uh, what's it called? Impugn,
Yeah.
impugn
You don't
those
want to
that do have the
castrate.
stomach for that.
Yeah. You don't want to castrate
Yeah,
the spirit of like warfare.
also you just come across as a loser. You just oh my god, you're basically an expatriate who still has beef over your ancestors getting whatever like 100 years ago. Like, all right, dude, like fucking like you're just pathetic at this point. Oh my god, we lost 100 years ago. It's like, dude, like you know you gotta. I mean, yes, you can't forgive things. You must avenge
Hmm.
your honor, but like at the same time, like obsessing as a certain number of people do over
Right.
certain stuff, like is pathetic, to be
Hmm.
frank. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and and philosophically speaking, it's a dilemma.
Hmm.
It's a dilemma because, of course, life is will to power, and life necessarily asks itself of itself cruelty. I mean, there's this great Nietzsche quote that talks about the essence of will to power is fundamentally appropriation, cruelty, conquest,
Hmm.
and anything and nothing else and nothing besides, which means that, if you want to do great things, you must never um, you must never renounce any means to it.
Hmm.
Now, I am not a fucking crazy psychopath. Like I said, there are
Yeah.
many things that I would definitely not fucking go walk the line of. There are
Hmm.
things that I can't stomach personally, and obviously any human being can. But of course, Nietzsche is not talking about human beings. He's talking about the overman. He's talking
Right.
about something super humanity,
Hmm.
And so I leave it up to the audience to discern that line for themselves and make that judgment for themselves as men and women
Hmm.
themselves. However, I really, just as we may condone people that do extreme acts of evil, quote unquote, I also condone those who do extreme acts of self-abnegation, like the declawed, defanged pacifist types. I
Hmm.
hate those more than anyone else, to be
Right.
frank with you, because they want to destroy every means of anything great, so that way they can be peaceful.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, this is just a longer segment,
Yeah.
maybe off tangent. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Just to close off that specific point before I go back to some other stuff we're talking about, I
Uh huh.
think even from because like the issue is a lot of people will see something like that and they'll critique it from a sort of a moral stance or whatever. But I actually see consequentialist or like actual analytical reason against, like, for example, certain amounts of cruelty. So if you take the Iliad, for example, right? They never had any intention of leaving Troy or like colonizing Troy and like making it one of their cities. Like it's like, no, we're gonna
Right.
we're gonna raise the city.
It's over.
Yeah. So if the
They're done.
Yeah. So if the Japanese were like, hey, we're going to go to China and we're going to kill every single Chinese person so that our people can settle in China, like analytically, yeah, and sure, that kind of makes sense, but they wanted to create an Asian empire. They wanted colonial subjects. And if you want a colonial subject, it's the same reason the feudal system works. The feudal system works because there is respect from the knight or from the samurai to the peasant.
Yes.
There's like
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There's a respect, right? The peasant will never disrespect me. If the peasant disrespects me, I'm cutting off your fucking head. You will never fucking disrespect me, but I will also put my life on the line to keep your family safe. I won't fuck your wife. I won't, rape your children, whatever. Like there's a clear relationship.
It's a benevolent paternalship kind of situation.
Exactly. So from an analytical perspective, you have to treat conquered peoples at least at a certain point. Like I get like the first wave sometimes you got to fucking crush some skulls. You got to show people what's up. However, at a certain perspective, I think the relationship between weak and strong is almost like you said, it's a paternal relationship. It's like a child and a parent, or like you even take dogs for example, right? Like a pet dog. Like you're not an equal to a dog. You're superior to the dog. The dog exists for you. If you and this might sound bad to some animal lovers. I am an animal lover. I love the environment, blah, blah, all that bullshit. However, a dog's purpose is to die for you. A dog should die for you. If you try to die for your dog, you're probably going to piss the dog off more than you.
It's ass backwards, brother. Yeah. I completely agree.
Right. Like
100%.
there's a relationship there. The dog should die for you. So if I'm getting robbed and my dog's going up to somebody, I'm going to try my best to not have my dog die. But my dog's going to be more pissed off if I'm dead and he's alive than the other way around. Their purpose is to fight and die for you. So the same thing with like, it's not quite the same thing, but it's like this. It's this power dynamic with social hierarchies that everybody has a responsibility. It's the same reason you said yourself, the peasant. Like we can find more virtue in the peasant and the merchant. The peasant plays a role. We need builders and we need architects. We need followers and we need leaders. So for that reason, I would say that is my personal interpretation of why cruelty goes beyond what is necessary. Sometimes you have to be cruel. I get that. But once you're settled down, once you try to create a stable society, it's about respect. Like even, this is an interesting thing I thought about.
Temperance.
Yeah, right? Yeah. This is just kind of a funny story, but like you take like the LGBTQ type shit, right? So I used to do security not too long ago while I'm in, just to make some money on the side. So I've worked some different kinds of shows and stuff like that for like these music bar venues. And twice I've had to deal with, a lot of people from that subculture, let's say. So I had to do a show for this one guy who was like, he's not like crazy. He's kind of, he's kind of like I don't know what to call him. Maybe he's bisexual or something, but he's like, he's flamboyant, and his fans are naturally that, but they're like kids. They're like 13, 14, 15. And then I had to I had to do security for a drag show, which fucking sucked. But the drag show, it's like they're these adult fucking whales. Half of them were disabled. Of course, they're doing the whole straight bashing thing at the beginning of the show. It was fucking sickening. But there was no respect between them, right? They were weaker than I am, but there was no respect. They thought we were equals. Whereas the kids show, some of them were kind of gay. Let's not be wrong, but there was respect there. So at a certain point, even though I'm like, we're not the same, we're not equal, they were nice to me. They understood we're not the fucking same. So like at a certain point, I almost will forgive more to someone who understands their position in society. Like you can be potentially even weaker, but if you understand, for example, you're weak, you're not going to reproduce in my society. You're here. And the only reason you exist is because you give respect to those who have power. You give respect to the warrior caste. I am more likely.
I allow you to.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's almost like I feel protective almost of them. Like I completely disagree with their lifestyle, and the lifestyle sickens me. But the fact that they showed respect and they showed like you understand who I am and where you are, it makes me less likely to feel hatred towards them versus the fat fucking adults who thought they were equal to me. Like, and some people would be pissed off by me saying that, but it's just that's fucking life,
No, I think it's true. I think that there's nothing wrong on whatever step of the ladder you may be. Dude, I'm not like super high fucking on whatever, you know. I'm not like aristocracy crazy up there. I'm not a Rothschild or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing wrong with where you fall on it. It's to do your duty where you are,
right,
and to get deference where you are. And because it's not even just like an augmentation thing. It's just I believe, like, maybe it's just an idiosyncratic belief, but I believe in reincarnation. I believe that every time you succeed in your like spiritual mission of this sleeve, this
Hmm.
life, that the next life that you become better and better, higher on the Dharma.
Mm.
You know, it's just like Hinduism.
Yeah.
I think we were all born with gifts. We're all born with vices and shortcomings. Our job in this life is to overcome spiritually the shortcomings, and every time we succeed in a life,
Hmm.
you upgrade in your Varna. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And every time you upgrade in your Varna, the less important it really becomes. Like that's the true idea of spiritual enlightenment. And I agree with you. Like I don't like go out there what the evil of our time is not necessarily that there are people up above and below. It is that the people below are trying to destroy any distinction of hierarchy and
Absolutely.
therefore destroy people the ability to achieve anything great,
Hmm.
which is actually very fundamentally evil because you throw the entirety of the world into this like the situation where they you know if you don't know what up or right looks like, where are we going? You just throw the
Right.
whole world into chaos and death, and that's what happened in the earlier Soviet Union. Is precisely that, and it was a hellscape precisely because it abolished the family, it abolished you know traditional quote unquote traditional sexual relations, it abolished all those kinds of concepts, and then of course it fell to shit, and as Lenin became ailing and then Stalin stepped in, he realized, okay, this crazy shit needs to stop. Like we're going to reconstitute, roll back a lot of stuff, you know, that we undid,
Hmm.
realize that the family is important, it's a building block of society, and this is unique and universal. This is one of my beefs with BAP. BAP is like, oh, the family is like, you know, only unique in the Roman case, and everywhere else it's not. It's like, no, 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 whoa, 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 no, like let's calm the fuck down there,
Hmm.
and you know, all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, I'm not a like complete psychopath or something, you know, and I think that you should treat people with respect and love and paternal affection.
Hmm.
In the Marine Corps, they teach you like leadership should be paternal. I mean, until recently, so like servant leadership, but I don't believe anything after 1980, honestly. Um, but like, yeah, paternal love is tough love. And tough love is like, hey, I love you no matter what. You may be a son of a bitch, you're my son of a bitch, but I will still call you a son of a bitch if
Right.
you fail your prerogative.
Hmm.
So I get what you're saying, brother, and it's tough because you say that out in public now, your average cow-like individual will defer to whatever's being said on whatever talking screen they defer to. So if they, you know, TikTok or Facebook or the opinion of their peers, but we all know between you and I that like it doesn't matter if the majority is wrong. If they're wrong, they're wrong.
Hmm.
And we're starting to see there's a reason why in the West rates of depression are all-time high. There's a reason why fertility rates are absolutely crashing in every developed country.
Hmm.
There's a reason why equality brings destruction on every single civilization it ever has visited itself upon.
Hmm.
And the reason is precisely this: the inability to embrace tough love, and by consequence, of course, the deeper kernel of truth is people unable to square themselves up with pain.
Hmm.
Love pain, and then everything follows from that, which is precisely why I think the warrior ethos has the medicine for our time,
Hmm.
because what is the warrior ethos if not at base overcoming pain, even death, to achieve something? I mean, is that not what we do? Maybe in a smaller, more contained amount in every other dynamic of life.
Right.
Does that not follow? And so this is why I'm trying to popularize it, is because as much as people who can abide me don't believe it, I believe in the betterment of man. I
Hmm.
believe in like showing people a better future. And that future, of course, is predicated on things that people want to look away and avoid. They want to cut corners, and I'm trying to show them. I mean, just like Jocko, I know it's cringe, but just like Jocko says, there's no fucking way around pain, brother. Like,
Hmm.
pain is where you're supposed to attack through. Attack through, and on the other side is everything you ever wanted. And for whatever reason, people are too stupid or lack the self-discipline to understand that basic truth of life. And it's unfortunate because, like, do you think I don't love doing drugs? Do you think I don't love having sex? Do you think I don't love all the vices of the world? Of course I do. Everyone does. I mean, you hook up anyone to opium, they become an addict.
Right.
But that's not the question of whether you enjoy something. Is it good for you? Does it cultivate virtue? Are you achieving the highest version of yourself? The answer is a resounding no, right? Because it has nothing to do with how you feel. Your feelings are ephemeral, which is why I think the most evil thing ever written in the time of man in the last 200 years is the pursuit of happiness.
Right. Absolutely.
So many people have been shown like lies and they consider it the truth. And one of the saddest things to me is that people think pursuing happiness will lead to happiness, and these people are the most miserable people ever. No. Pursue pain, and happiness may come. Who cares about happiness?
Yeah.
Care about achievement. That's the most important thing. That's my like resounding war cry. I don't give a fuck about pain, dude. My life's been pain. I don't give a fuck. And besides, I think my life's been pain. There's plenty of more people who have experienced, 10 times the pain that I've ever had. So it's just like it's bullshit. No. Life is beautiful precisely because it's painful, not because it's beautiful, like, happy or whatever bullshit.
Right.
These are tales for children and weak people. You know what I mean? Happiness. I just want to be happy. God, I can't stand it. Sorry if I'm ranting a little bit just because I'm
No,
getting a
you're
little
good.
bit hammered.